A summer festival, my sister's idealism, and one slap from a cop. That's all it took for our perfect Saturday to explode into a desperate fight for justice against unchecked power. The scent of kettle corn and grilled hot dogs hung heavy in the summer air, a perfect backdrop for a perfect Saturday. My little sister, Maya, was practically vibrating with excitement. At 16, she was the newly elected president of her high school's social justice club, and today was their first big event. A voter registration drive at the town's annual Founders' Day festival. She had a folding table, a stack of clipboards, and a smile that could disarm a battalion. I was there as her designated pack mule and proud older brother, hauling boxes of bottled water and making sure she actually ate something besides sugar. Everything was going great. People were stopping by, charmed by Maya's earnest passion. She wasn't pushy, she was just incredibly informed, talking to people about local elections and the importance of having their voices heard. Then he showed up. Officer Miller. You know the type. Mid-40s, with a gut that strained the buttons of his uniform and a pair of mirrored sunglasses that seemed permanently affixed to his face. He walked with a swagger that was meant to project authority, but just came off as insecure. He didn't approach the table. He just stood about 20 feet away, arms crossed, watching. His gaze was a physical weight. I felt it first. That familiar prickle on the back of my neck, the one every black man learns to recognize. It's the feeling of being assessed, not as a person, but as a potential problem. I nudged Maya, trying to be subtle. Cops watching, I murmured. Maya, bless her fearless heart, just glanced over her shoulder. He can watch all he wants, she said, her voice bright. We're not doing anything wrong. We have a permit. She held up the laminated paper from the city, a tiny shield of legitimacy. Miller must have seen the gesture as a challenge. He pushed off the oak tree he was leaning against and sauntered over, his boots scuffing on the pavement. He ignored me completely, his focus lasering in on my sister. What's all this, then? He asked, his voice a low drawl that was just a little too friendly. Voter registration, officer, Maya said, her customer service smile firmly in place. Want to make sure you're registered at your current address? His lips tightened into a thin, unpleasant line. I'm good, but I'm not sure about this setup. You got a permit for soliciting. We're not soliciting. We're providing a community service, and yes, our permit is right here, she said, tapping the paper. He didn't even look at it. Instead, he picked up one of her pamphlets. Know your rights, huh? He sneered, reading the title. You one of those activists, trying to stir up trouble? I'm trying to educate people, Maya said, her smile finally starting to falter. The politeness in her voice was getting brittle. Everyone should know their rights. Look, I said, stepping forward slightly, keeping my hands open and visible. We're not looking for any problems, officer. We're just here for the festival like everyone else. Miller's head snapped towards me, as if he'd just noticed I existed. You stay out of this, he grunted. His attention went right back to Maya. I think you people are disturbing the peace. I think you need to pack up this little table and go home. You people, Maya shot back, her temper flaring. She was 16, and the injustice of it all was too much for her to swallow. We have a right to be here. We have a permit. You're the one disturbing the peace by harassing a minor. That was it. That was the switch. I saw the change in Miller's posture, the tightening of his jaw. He saw a black girl talking back to him, and his entire worldview short-circuited. He took a step closer, invading her space, puffing out his chest. What did you say to me, little girl? I said you're harassing me, Maya repeated, her voice shaking but defiant. She held her ground. It happened so fast I almost didn't process it. 1 second he was looming over her, the next his hand flew up. It wasn't a punch. It was a backhand, a slap filled with such dismissive, venomous contempt that it stole the air from my lungs. The sound of it, a sharp, ugly crack cut through the cheerful noise of the festival. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd around us. Maya stumbled back, her hand flying to her cheek, where a bright red mark was already blooming. Tears welled in her eyes, born of shock and humiliation more than pain. My blood went supernova. Every protective instinct in my body screamed at me to launch myself at him, to tear him apart. But a primal, deeper instinct, the one that had been drilled into me since I was a boy, screamed louder. Don't touch him. Don't move. Don't give him the excuse. Instead, I pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely unlock it, but I hit record. You just assaulted a child, I said, my voice dangerously low. It's on camera. Everyone saw it. Miller just laughed. It was a horrifying, humorless sound. He seemed to swell with power, thriving on the confrontation. He turned his venomous glare on me. Oh, a phone. I'm so scared, he mocked. He took the clip-on radio from his shoulder. Dispatch, this is Miller. I have a situation at Founders Park. 2 suspects, 1 juvenile female, 1 adult male. Female is charged with assaulting an officer. The male is obstructing. Need backup. He put the radio back and pulled out his handcuffs, the metal glinting menacingly in the sun. He looked at Maya, who was frozen in terror, and then at me. You want to know your rights? You have the right to remain silent. He grinned, a predator who had his prey cornered. And trust me, you're going to want to use it. We were completely and utterly screwed. There was no way out. The world seemed to shrink to the space between me, my sister, and this monster in a uniform. My arm, holding the phone, felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, but I kept it steady, my thumb a permanent fixture on the screen to prevent it from locking. The lens was my only weapon, my only witness. Don't you touch her, I said, my voice shaking with a rage so cold it terrified me. I took a half step forward, putting myself slightly more in front of Maya. Miller's ugly grin widened. This was what he wanted. He wanted me to get physical. He wanted a reason. Oh, the big brother, he sneered, jangling the handcuffs. You're obstructing a lawful arrest. That's another charge for you, son. He lunged for Maya. I moved to block him, and that's when his hand shot out and shoved my phone. The screen went dark for a second as it hit my chest. Stop resisting, he yelled, for the benefit of the crowd and his impending backup. But the crowd wasn't buying it. He wasn't resisting, a woman shouted from near the funnel cake stand. You hit that little girl. We all saw it. A chorus of agreement rose up. I realized I wasn't the only one recording anymore. A small constellation of phone screens had lit up around us, all pointed at Miller. His head swiveled around, his mirrored sunglasses reflecting a dozen tiny images of his own snarling face. For a fleeting moment, a flicker of panic crossed his features. The narrative was slipping from his control. But then we heard it. The distant wail of sirens growing closer with each beat of my pounding heart. The sound seemed to embolden him, washing away his momentary fear. His cavalry was coming. 2 squad cars, lights flashing, screeched to a halt at the edge of the park lawn, sending families scattering. 2 officers, younger and fitter than Miller, jumped out. They surveyed the scene. Miller puffed up and angry, me with my phone back up and pointed at him, Maya crying silently behind me, the circle of onlookers. They immediately moved to flank Miller. What's going on, Dave? One of them asked, his hand resting on his service weapon. This girl assaulted me, Miller grunted, pointing a thick finger at Maya. And this one, he gestured at me, is obstructing. The whole crowd's getting hostile. It was such a blatant, incredible lie that I almost laughed. He slapped my 16-year-old sister for no reason, I yelled, making sure my phone's microphone was pointed towards the new officers. We have it on video. All of us do. I gestured to the crowd. The second officer, a man with a severe haircut and emotionless eyes, turned to me. Sir, I'm going to need you to put the phone down and step away from the scene. His tone was flat, robotic. He wasn't asking. I am the scene, I shot back. And this is evidence. I'm not putting it down. This was it. The moment of no return. They were going to take me down. I could see it in their eyes. The first officer started moving towards me, pulling out his own set of zip ties. Last chance, pal, he said. I braced myself, trying to angle my body to protect Maya. I was going to be arrested. We both were. They would take our phones, delete the videos, and create a report so full of lies we'd never see daylight. The word of 3 cops against 2 black kids. It wasn't a fight we could win. Maya let out a small sob behind me, a sound that broke my heart into a million pieces. It was over. And then, through the sound of the crackling police radios and the murmuring crowd, came a different sound. It wasn't a siren. It was the smooth, powerful purr of a high-end engine. A vehicle was approaching, moving slowly but with an undeniable sense of purpose, parting the crowd not with a siren, but with its sheer presence. It wasn't a squad car. It was a long black SUV with tinted windows, the kind that absorbs light and looks like it belongs in a motorcade. It had government plates. It pulled to a stop directly behind the two squad cars, its silent authority making the flashing police lights look garish and frantic. Miller and the other cops paused, their heads turning in unison towards the vehicle. Confusion rippled through their ranks. This wasn't part of the script. The driver's side door opened, and a man in a crisp, dark suit and an earpiece stepped out. He scanned the scene with a quick, professional gaze, his eyes lingering on Maya's red cheek and my phone before settling on Miller. He didn't say a word. He just walked to the rear passenger door and opened it. A polished black shoe was the first thing to emerge from the SUV. It was followed by a perfectly creased trouser leg, and then the man himself. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit that screamed money and power. He had a salt-and-pepper beard, neatly trimmed, and a face I recognized instantly, not from around town, but from every news channel and billboard in the state. My heart lodged itself somewhere in my throat. It was Governor Thompson. He didn't look at us. He didn't look at the crowd. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, were locked on Officer Miller. The air crackled. The festival music seemed to fade into a distant hum. Even the police radios fell silent. It was as if the world was holding its breath. Governor Thompson took 2 deliberate steps forward, his security detail moving with him like shadows. "Officer," he said, his voice calm but carrying an authority that made the cops' blustering seem childish. "What precisely is going on here?" Miller was dumbfounded. His jaw worked for a moment, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish that had just been yanked out of the water. He straightened up, puffing his chest out in a pathetic attempt to reclaim some semblance of control. "Sir, Governor," he stammered, his bravado evaporating like mist. "We have a situation here. This young lady assaulted an officer of the law." The governor's gaze finally shifted, moving from Miller to my sister. He saw her tear-streaked face, the livid red handprint on her cheek. His expression, which had been stern, hardened into something colder, something dangerous. He looked at her not as a suspect or a juvenile female, but as a child who had been hurt. He then looked at me, at the phone I was still holding, my knuckles white. "Assaulted you?" the governor repeated, his voice dropping an octave. He turned his piercing gaze back to Miller. "Explain to me how this child, who can't weigh more than 100 pounds, managed to assault you." She was belligerent, sir. Uncooperative. She pushed me," Miller lied, his voice getting higher with each word. The lie was so clumsy, so transparent it was almost painful to hear. He was drowning and grabbing for any piece of driftwood he could find. "He's lying!" I found my voice shouting louder than I intended. "He hit her. He slapped her in the face because she told him she knew her rights. We all saw it." I gestured again to the crowd, which had grown even larger and was now buzzing with a kind of electric excitement. The governor didn't need me to tell him. He was a politician, and his greatest skill was reading a room. He could see the truth in the faces of the dozens of people surrounding us, their phones still raised like silent accusers. He looked back at Miller, his eyes narrowed. "You're telling me, Officer Miller, that in front of a park full of your constituents, your first course of action with a 16-year-old girl was to strike her?" Miller started to sweat. I could see beads of it forming on his forehead, just above his stupid mirrored sunglasses. "Sir, with all due respect, you don't have all the facts. It was a chaotic situation. A key." "The only chaos I see, officer," the governor said, his voice like chips of ice, "is the one you created." He took another step forward, closing the distance until he was standing directly in front of Miller. Despite being a good 6 inches shorter, the governor seemed to tower over him. "I was on my way to give a speech here. My wife and daughter are meeting me. They're about your daughter's age," he said, nodding towards Maya. "Now, I'm going to have to explain to them why a man who swore an oath to protect this community was seen hitting a child." The 2 younger cops looked like they wanted to be swallowed by the earth. They were standing stock still, their hands hovering uncertainly near their belts, their eyes darting between Miller and the most powerful man in the state. Their backup plan had just become their worst nightmare. The governor gestured to his aide. "Get the chief of police on the phone, now." He then turned his attention to me. "Son, what's your name?" "Marcus," I said, my voice hoarse. "This is my sister, Maya." "Marcus," he said, giving me a slight reassuring nod. "Would you be willing to show my head of security the video on your phone?" "Yes, sir," I breathed. It was then that I saw it. As Miller stood there, trapped in the governor's unblinking stare, a dark patch began to spread across the front of his khaki uniform pants. It started small, a shadow in the fabric, then rapidly expanded into a wet, undeniable stain. The smell, sharp and acrid, hit the air. My mind reeled for a second, struggling to process what I was seeing. Officer David Miller, the big, tough cop who had terrorized my sister and sneered at the law, had just wet his pants in front of half the town and the governor of the state. The sheer pathetic humiliation of it was staggering. His face, already pale with sweat, turned a blotchy, mortified red. His last shred of authority dissolved right there on the grass. A few people in the crowd noticed it at the same time I did. A disbelieving snicker cut through the tension, followed by another, and then a wave of muffled laughter rippled through the onlookers. The sound was more devastating to Miller than any reprimand could have been. It stripped him bare. He looked down at the dark, spreading stain on his trousers, and whatever fight was left in him just collapsed. He visibly deflated, his shoulders slumping, the mirrored sunglasses suddenly looking like a child's costume. The governor didn't laugh. He didn't even smile. He simply looked at the pathetic display with a kind of weary disgust. "Officer," he said, his voice flat and final, "you and your men can leave. Now. The state police will take over from here." The two younger cops looked immensely relieved. They practically dragged a catatonic Miller back to their squad car, the jeers and phone cameras of the crowd following them every step of the way. They didn't even bother turning their sirens on as they pulled away, just slinking off into the afternoon traffic. Once they were gone, the governor turned his full attention to us. The intimidating public figure vanished, replaced by a man who looked like a concerned father. "Maya," he said gently, his voice softening, "are you all right?" Maya, who had been hiding behind me this whole time, peeked out. She nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. The red mark on her cheek stood out starkly against her skin. The governor's jaw tightened as he looked at it. "My security team includes a paramedic. I'd like him to take a look at you, if that's okay," he offered. Maya just nodded again, still too overwhelmed to speak. The aide who had been on the phone came back. "Chief Wallace is on his way to your office, Governor. He sends his profound apologies." "He can offer his apologies to this young lady," the governor said, his gaze not leaving Maya. He then looked at me. "Marcus, I cannot thank you enough for your courage, for keeping your head, and for documenting what happened here. That takes a strength many people don't have." I just managed a nod, my own adrenaline finally starting to recede, leaving me shaky. I showed his head of security the video, and he took a copy using a small device. Several people from the crowd came forward, offering their own footage. Within minutes, the governor's team had an airtight case from a dozen different angles. The governor's wife and daughter arrived a short while later, their expressions shifting from cheerful anticipation to shocked concern as they took in the scene. The governor spoke to them quietly, and his wife, a kind-faced woman, immediately came over to Maya, putting a comforting arm around her shoulder and speaking to her in a low, soothing voice. We spent the next hour with the governor and his team. They took our official statements. They assured us that Miller would not just be suspended, but fired and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. The governor gave me his personal cell phone number. "If you or your family need anything at all, you call me directly," he insisted. By the time we packed up Maya's voter registration table, the sun was beginning to set. The festival was winding down, but the story of Officer Miller was just beginning to catch fire online. The videos, including mine, had gone viral. Cop Pants was trending on Twitter. Driving home, Maya was quiet. She held an ice pack to her cheek, a gift from the governor's paramedic. I was so scared, Marcus, she finally whispered into the silence of the car. I know, kiddo, I said, reaching over to squeeze her hand. I was too. But you were so brave. You stood up to him. You didn't back down. He was going to arrest us, she said, her voice trembling. Yeah, he was, I admitted. But he didn't win, Maya. You won. What you are doing today? Registering voters, making sure people's voices are heard. That's the real power. It's more powerful than a bully with a badge, and it's definitely more powerful than a governor in a suit. A small smile touched her lips. The governor was pretty cool, though. Yeah, I laughed. The governor was pretty cool. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Officer Miller was fired and charged with assault and perjury. The 2 officers with him were placed on permanent desk duty, pending an internal affairs investigation for attempting to cover it up. The town's police chief issued a public apology. But the best part, the most satisfying resolution of all, came about a month later. Maya's voter registration drive became legendary at her high school. Inspired by her story, dozens of kids joined her social justice club. For the next local election, they partnered with the governor's office for a statewide youth voter initiative. Maya, my brilliant, brave 16-year-old sister, stood on a stage next to Governor Thompson and gave a speech about the importance of knowing your rights and holding power accountable. Her voice didn't shake. Her smile was confident and bright. And as I stood in the crowd, watching her inspire hundreds of people, I knew that the ugly memory of a slap in the park would never define her. What would define her was the moment she refused to be silenced.